Today I'm going to tell you about 5 rarest Rolexes, at least in my opinion. I'm going to start with the largest Rolex ever made. And this thing dates back to 1942. You're thinking, it's not the Yachtmaster, that's 43 millimeters. It's not the Deep Sea, the James Cameron, that's 43 millimeters. Believe it or not, Rolex back in 1942 made a 44 millimeter manually wound split second chronograph. Again, reference number 𝗿𝗏𝗲𝗆, the Rochefort chronograph. Now, there's only about 12 examples of this reference that exist out there. Last known sales price was somewhere around $2.5 million. Now, it was Philips that set the auction record for that watch at $2.5 million. Now, this is the anti-magnetic watch. Back in those days, there was a need for an anti-magnetic watch, mostly used by doctors, believe it or not, that, worked around certain machines that emitted magnetic rays and that would affect the watch. There was actually use for it. Today, for Rolex, it's kind of a moot point. They're all anti-magnetic, but back then, this was kind of a big deal, and it was also a bit of a horological feat. Now, if you look at this watch, it doesn't really look much like a Rolex, and its sheer size is extremely, extremely surprising. You have the 2-register chronograph. Obviously, the Rolex crown gives it away. Even the Rolex crown doesn't even look the same. But again, we're going back to the 40s, so not surprised at all. A bit of a grail. It's up there for me along with, a one-off Rolex like the Paul Newman one that sold for millions of dollars, right? Now, this next one, surprisingly, is not a vintage piece. This is something that's actually pretty recent. I think it was the Monaco Legends auction where this thing fetched $2.5 million. And it's a platinum Yachtmaster. And you're thinking, what's the big deal about this watch? Why the hell is it $2.5 million? Again, provenance is a big deal. Considering this watch is former property of Patrick Henninger, the late president of Rolex, who was a very, very big deal. I can do an entire episode on the history of that man, his father, etc.
I found this on the web for who is the lead president of Rolex. Check it out.
And just how important they were to Rolex. They really shaped Rolex to be the company they are today, and that is the kings. They are the kings. They are number one. If they're number one, then number two is somewhere down here. Quick numbers for you, 2023. Rolex is the first company to ever record 10.1 billion, okay, in revenue. Number 2 was Cartier, number 3 was Omega, and if you put number 2, 3, and 4 together, they still don't add up to the revenue that Rolex did in 2023. Pretty amazing company. It's the most recognizable watch in the world. But back to the watch, right? Now, this entire watch is made out of platinum, which makes it extremely unique. The fact that it has a platinum bracelet also makes it unique. Even has a platinum flip lock, right? Which is not very practical to make out of platinum. But the entire watch is 100% platinum. Everything is made out of platinum. Also, it has a pretty unique dial. It features diamond hour markers with baguette cut sapphire, something you don't see and will never see on a Yachtmaster. It was Patrick's way to stay within the heritage of Rolex because they made a ton of these Yachtmasters in stainless steel with platinum bezel. It was for those that knew kind of thing, right? He didn't want to stand out too much because, face it, he could have made himself anything. But in the very least, he knew he was the only person in the world to have that watch. They made that watch for him to celebrate their 10 millionth chronometer. And again, at a glance, it looks just like another Yachtmaster, right? But it's not. It is a piece unique. And it just goes to show how crazy collectors go for something that is a confirmed one of one that has probably the best provenance you can get. It belonged to the CEO of Rolex, who shaped Rolex to be who they are today, as I said earlier. So don't know what this thing fetches in auction if it goes back. Usually pieces like this tend to stay in private collection and never leave that private collection unless that person passes it on to someone else. These are the type of watches where buying them is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I'm not surprised that it fetched the $2.5 million price tag. The next watch I'm going to talk about is going to be, it's sort of in the likes of the last one. It's a platinum Daytona with lapis lazuli dial, that beautiful blue stone. Last known price on the watch was somewhere around $3.3 million. Now, this was made in 1999. 1999 was an interesting year for Rolex because they finally went away from zenith movements. They went away from the famed Zenith 𝗿𝗏𝗄, which they used from 1988 all the way out to 2000. A little bit of trivia for you here. A lot of collectors like to collect what they call the first production year or the last production year. At the one hand, it's kind of gimmicky to have the first ever made or the last ever made, but on the second hand, usually those are the years where they produce less, because Rolex produces so many watches. None of them are limited editions. Very rarely do you see a piece unique that was made for somebody, so this is what normal collectors do. They can't afford a $3.2 million watch, right? But the interesting part about it is Zenith movements went away in year 2000, right? And that was a serial, right? You know, this is before the random serial number, so this was serial A something, something, something. But believe it or not, year 2000, the next serial number that was brought on was the P serial. And the first quarter of 2000, which became P serial, is when they still use the Zenith movement. So technically, the A serial is the last official Zenith Daytona, but it's the first quarter of P serial production. It's P1 something, 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 I forget the exact range, that still has the Zenith movement. And those are probably the most collectible ones. The difference is probably 30 to 40% in price between an A Zenith and a P Zenith from the first quarter. But back to our Daytona, again, a platinum case Daytona, and that's virtually unheard of. Today, we do have a platinum Daytona in a lineup that joined us. Wasn't really a big hit in the beginning because people were like, well, it's too heavy, it's too expensive, blah, 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 blah. The brown bezel people didn't like. But the Daytonas will only produce stainless steel, white gold, yellow gold for many, many years. Then they came out with the 𝗴𝗿𝗲𝗆, as they like to dub it. It's just a rose gold Daytona, but you know, companies like to use fancy names like 𝗴𝗿𝗏𝗏. But it's now been confirmed that one very lucky customer was given this unique masterpiece in 1999. And there's a rumor Patrick Henninger also wore one of these. I can neither deny or confirm that. It's just a rumor, you never know. I don't know if you're noticing a pattern here, but how is it that we do not know exactly? Because according to records, this was a prototype, and they're saying that there's only approximately 11 pieces that were made, but yet we only saw one of them. Going backwards, Rolex had really terrible records. And the problem is that there's not a whole lot of records out there from Rolex themselves to be able to confirm these things. Of course, this is one of those watches that we were able to confirm, well, not me personally, but Sotheby's, who's the one that sold the watch for $3.2 million. So the bottom line is, here you have a Daytona in platinum at a time where platinum was not used for Daytona. That is supposedly only one out there. They're saying it's a prototype of approximately 11 pieces made, but we've yet to see 10 more of them. Listen, it's a gorgeous watch, I can't say it, but it looks like any other Daytona on a strap. Little did the individual know who got that watch that it would fetch $3.2 million in auction. Now let's talk about something that's rare, but yet not expensive, because just because something is super rare doesn't mean it's expensive, because something is worth the amount of money one is willing to pay for it. Like the 6602 Datejust Transcontinental. The last one sold, I think, for $16,000, $17,000, I believe, right? But this is the only Rolex with a rotating 12-hour bezel. It's extremely rare. It's in stainless steel. They made them in the late 50s. And they made it in 36 millimeters. Now, a lot of people will assume that the 6609 is the correct reference number because there's also an entirely different 6602 moon phase. Now, Sotheby's called this the 6602/6609, but the 6602 is actually engraved in the case in every known existence. And some people suggest there's only 4 of these in the market, but yet it didn't fetch a whole lot of money. And maybe this is why, because a lot of times things go up for auctions, especially things that are that rare, and people look at this, oh, it looks like an old turnograph, or it looks like an old something or other, and sometimes the bidding doesn't just get up there. But I bet you the next time this thing goes up in auction, I'm fairly certain it's going to fetch a whole lot more than that $16,000 price range that it fetched last time, considering now we know there's only 4 of them out there. Every time I mention this watch, I can't help to think of the song Regulator by Warren G from when I was a kid. But this watch dates a lot further than when I was a kid. In fact, it dates back to before my father was born, because this watch is circa 1930s, mid to late 30s, and it's the reference 2737. Last one I remember fetched about 185 grand in auction. And this is an extremely rare example, again, because it is a stainless steel chronograph, but more importantly is the lacquer dial. The price of this watch obviously will go up and down based on the condition of the dial, because in 1938, so now we're talking about 62, we're talking about 86 years later, this watch surfaced it. For that lacquer dial to survive, especially considering back then these things weren't expensive, they were all tool watches, they used to all get beat up pretty badly. So to have one survive with a nice lacquer dial is almost impossible, especially considering they only made 12 of them. I can only remember maybe a handful of these showing up in auctions, and I think some of those were the same watches over, where somebody bought them, put them back in auction, and actually made a profit every single time. We're talking about rarity, we're talking about something that's extremely old, we're talking about something that's complicated, and you're saying it's not complicated, think Patek 1518s. Chronographs are one of the most complicated complications to execute for a watchmaker, because the loss of amplitude when you run a chronograph in a regular watch is tremendous. And it takes a master watchmaker to master the skill of adding a chronograph to a watch. So don't take chronographs lately. For me personally, aesthetically, it's a beautiful watch. Now, it's for those that know. Half the people, when you put that thing on your wrist, is 36 millimeters. It's pretty small. Nobody will ever know you'll have 200 grand on your wrist. But for those that know, even the chronograph buttons are not like the traditional chronograph buttons that you would expect, and the way the crown is sitting. The crown is much thinner, not a typical Rolex crown. And even the way the case is done. Everything about this says not Rolex, but if you know, you know. And you'd be surprised that all these watches that I've talked about, how often somebody runs across something they do not know. They're lucky enough to run into somebody who does know, who's honorable. It tells them, hey, this watch you bought, many years ago, your grandfather passed down to you, which he probably paid a couple of $100 for somewhere, or was gifted the damn watch, is now worth potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, last, I'm going to talk about an honorable mention. This is actually a watch that we have here. All right, it's the moon phase triple calendar chronograph, which is also known as the 𝗙𝗰𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀. It's actually rarer than the 𝗙𝗰𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 moon phase, reference 8237 and 81806. And the reason for that, because most of these were actually made with a moon phase. Not a lot of them were made without a moon phase. There's always controversy surrounding with this particular watch. Some argue whether these even existed. Well, we physically have it, so I know it existed. But again, it's going back to what I said earlier, poor record keeping by Rolex, outsourcing certain things to other companies like dial makings and things of that nature. These are all the things that cause a lot of controversy. Some of these controversies stay dealer to dealer, some of these controversies stay between the clients and collectors, and a lot of those controversies even hit the major auction houses, because at the end of the day, not knowing something is not a defense for a crime, if you will. And that's the issue with a lot of these collectible Rolexes, that, again, due to poor record keeping, sometimes you just don't know. However, one thing stands certain, and that is the fact that whenever a Rolex that is rarely seen or has never been seen goes to the auction block, it usually fetches buku dollars, because it's still the most popular and most collectible brand in the world. So these are my 5 picks. If you guys want to comment below of something that you would have put on this list, because this isn't set in stone, this is just what I wanted to talk about. But I would love to hear from you, your top 5 rarest Rolexes that you think should have been on this list, by commenting below. Other than that, like, comment, share, subscribe, and I will see you on the next one.